What happens when an undercover CEO walks into his own cafe and sees everything falling apart? In today's story, a CEO disguises himself as a regular employee to investigate troubling reports about one of his locations. What he finds, rude management, overworked staff, and mistreated customers, forces him to take drastic action. But the biggest shock? The person holding the cafe together isn't the manager. It's an underappreciated employee who deserves so much more. Stay tuned to see how this undercover CEO exposes the truth and turns everything around. Daniel Carter sat in his sleek office overlooking the coastline, tapping his fingers against his desk as he skimmed through yet another disappointing report. His cafe chain, Coastal Brews, had always been his pride and joy, a place where customers could enjoy quality coffee in a welcoming environment. But lately, something has gone wrong. The numbers for one of his locations had been steadily declining, and customer complaints had flooded in about poor service, unprofessional staff, and a cold, uninviting atmosphere. Employees were quitting at an alarming rate, and despite reassurances from his district managers, Daniel had a gut feeling that something was being left unsaid. He had built Coastal Brews from the ground up, creating a culture that valued both customers and employees, but it seemed like those values were slipping away. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Frustrated with the lack of clear answers, Daniel decided to take matters into his own hands. Relying on filtered reports and second-hand accounts wasn't enough. He needed to see the truth with his own eyes. And there was only one way to do that. He would go undercover. If he walked into the cafe as himself, employees would put on their best behavior, masking the real issues. But if he became just another worker, he could observe everything firsthand. With that in mind, Daniel devised a plan. He would apply for a part-time position at the struggling location under a false identity, disguising himself as an older, scruffy-looking man named Dan. Wearing an old flannel shirt, a worn-out cap, and fake reading glasses, he would blend in as a new hire, taking on an entry-level role. It had been years since he had worked behind a counter, and the thought of stepping back into the daily grind of a cafe filled him with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Would the employees recognize him? Would he be able to keep his cover? More importantly, just how bad had things become? As he adjusted his disguise in the mirror, he took a deep breath, determined to find out. Tomorrow morning, he wouldn't walk into Coastal Brews as the CEO. He would walk in as Dan, the new kitchen assistant, and if there were problems to uncover, he would face them head-on. Daniel arrived at Coastal Brews the next morning, adjusting the brim of his faded baseball cap as he stepped through the door. The cafe should have been a warm, inviting space filled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the hum of friendly conversation. Instead, the atmosphere felt strained, almost lifeless. Employees moved sluggishly behind the counter, their expressions blank, as if they were just going through the motions. Customers stood waiting at the register, some shifting impatiently while others exchanged frustrated glances. It didn't take long for Daniel to realize that something was off. A woman in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes and an even sharper tone, barely glanced up as he approached. Her name tag read Megan, manager. "You the new guy?" she asked, not bothering to make eye contact as she scrolled through her phone. "Yes, I'm Dan, here for my first shift," Daniel replied, keeping his voice casual. Megan exhaled loudly, clearly irritated by the inconvenience of training someone new. "Whatever, we're short-staffed, so don't expect much help. Just do what Lily tells you." She gestured vaguely toward the barista behind the counter before returning to her phone, completely uninterested. Daniel turned to see Lily, a young woman in her early 20s juggling multiple tasks at once, taking orders, making drinks, and running plates to customers. Unlike Megan, she looked focused and hardworking, but overwhelmed. The tension in her posture and the tired look in her eyes told him she was stretched thin. As Daniel observed her, a sudden commotion at the entrance caught his attention. An older man in a tattered jacket stepped hesitantly inside, clutching a small plastic bag filled with his belongings. His face was worn, his eyes filled with uncertainty. He approached the counter, shifting nervously before speaking. "Excuse me, I was just wondering if I could get a small cup of coffee. I don't have much, but I—" Before he could finish, Megan snapped to attention, her face twisting into a scowl. "No loitering. We don't give out freebies," she barked, crossing her arms. The man flinched, holding up his hands defensively. I wasn't asking for a handout. I can pay, I said no," Megan interrupted sharply, her voice loud enough to draw glances from nearby customers. "Get out before I call the cops." Daniel felt his blood boil, but he forced himself to stay in character. He had seen enough. This was not just a management issue. This cafe had lost its heart, and he was determined to find out just how deep the problems ran. As Daniel tied his apron and stepped behind the counter, he was immediately struck by the chaos unfolding around him. Orders were piling up, customers stood waiting far longer than they should, and the tension among the employees was almost tangible. Lily was practically running the cafe by herself, darting between the espresso machine, register, and pickup counter, while two other employees moved sluggishly, avoiding eye contact as they half-heartedly completed tasks. Megan, of course, remained glued to her phone, sipping coffee as if oblivious to the mounting frustration. Daniel positioned himself near the register, watching as Lily struggled to keep up. A mother with two small children approached the counter, her face tight with frustration. "Excuse me," she said, trying to keep her voice polite. "I think my order was made wrong. I asked for a caramel latte, but this is just black coffee." Lily immediately turned, already reaching for the drink. "Oh, I'm so sorry about that. Let me fix it for you right away." Before she could, Megan interjected with a loud sigh, rolling her eyes. "Maybe if you ordered it right the first time, we wouldn't have this problem." Daniel's stomach twisted at the blatant rudeness. The mother stiffened, clearly taken aback. "Excuse me?" she said, her tone now edged with irritation. "I'm sure I ordered correctly." Megan shrugged dismissively. "Well, we're busy and mistakes happen. No need to make a big deal about it." Daniel felt his patience snap. He had spent years building Coastal Brews into a place where customers felt welcome, and here was his manager treating a paying customer like an inconvenience. Stepping forward, he quickly intervened. "I'll take care of this," he said, flashing a reassuring smile at the mother before turning to Lily. "Go ahead and remake the order. It's in the house." The mother's expression softened. "Thank you," she said, still clearly upset but appreciative of the gesture. As Lily remade the drink, she leaned in slightly and whispered, "Thanks for that. Megan always talks to people like that, but I didn't want to say anything." Daniel's heart sank. How many employees had been silenced out of fear? How many customers had been driven away because of Megan's behavior? Watching Lily work tirelessly while Megan contributed nothing, Daniel knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a struggling cafe, it was a failing system, and it had to change. But before he could act, he needed to see just how deep the rot went. By his second shift, Daniel had seen enough to confirm his suspicions. Coastal Brews wasn't failing because of bad coffee or poor location. It was failing because of toxic leadership. But to fully understand how deep the problem ran, he needed to blend in more, observe more, and push his cover further. Instead of staying behind the counter, he volunteered to help in the kitchen, where he quickly noticed another troubling pattern. As he prepped ingredients, Daniel watched as expired dairy and stale pastries were casually thrown into orders without a second thought. When he asked one of the kitchen workers about it, the young man just shrugged. "Megan doesn't care. She says it's too expensive to throw things away just because they're a little old." That statement alone sent alarm bells ringing in Daniel's head. Cutting corners on quality was not how he had built this company. But it wasn't just the food that was suffering, it was the staff too. Employees seemed nervous, constantly glancing over their shoulders, as if afraid of being scolded. And it wasn't long before Daniel witnessed why. A teenage boy working the sandwich station hesitantly approached Megan with a schedule issue, explaining that he had an exam the next morning and was hoping to swap shifts. Megan barely looked up from her phone before snapping, "Not my problem. Figure it out or quit." The boy's face fell, and Daniel clenched his fists beneath the counter. This wasn't just laziness. This was outright bullying. The more he observed, the clearer it became. Megan ruled through intimidation, doing as little work as possible while making sure everyone else was too afraid to challenge her. Meanwhile, Lily continued to hold everything together, moving between stations, fixing mistakes, and apologizing for things that weren't even her fault. The customers noticed her kindness, but so did Megan. And instead of appreciating it, she resented it. At one point, Megan snapped at Lily for being too nice, telling her she needed to stop coddling customers. Lily just ducked her head and kept working. but Daniel saw the frustration flicker across her face. She was exhausted. She was undervalued, and she was the only reason this place hadn't completely fallen apart. Daniel had seen enough. He couldn't let this continue, but before making his move, he needed to push Megan just a little further, to see exactly how she would react under pressure. By the end of the lunch rush, Daniel had witnessed more than enough to justify action, but what happened next sealed Megan's fate completely. As the cafe filled with the usual midday crowd, the tension in the air was undeniable. Customers were growing frustrated, waiting too long for their orders while employees scrambled to keep up. Megan, of course, remained perched near the register, scrolling on her phone, ignoring the chaos around her. Then, a teenage kitchen worker hesitantly approached her, nervously rubbing his hands together. "Megan, the dishwasher's backed up and we're out of clean mugs. Should I?" Megan rolled her eyes and cut him off before he could finish. "Do I look like I care? Find another one, or tell the customers they have to wait." Daniel bit back his anger as the teenager lowered his head and backed away, clearly defeated. But just when he thought Megan couldn't be any worse, the final straw came. An elderly man in a wheelchair rolled up to the counter, fumbling slightly as he tried to unzip his wallet. Lily immediately stepped forward, her voice kind and patient. "Take your time, sir. No rush at all." But before the man could finish his order, Megan groaned loudly from behind the counter. "Oh, for God's sake, Lily. We don't have all day," she barked. "The line's already too long. If he can't order fast enough, tell him to come back later." The cafe fell silent. Customers turned, shocked at Megan's sheer cruelty. The elderly man flinched, looking embarrassed, and Lily's face turned red with anger. Daniel felt his blood boil. This wasn't just bad management. This was inhumane. Without thinking, Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "She's helping him, Megan. That's called customer service. Maybe you should try it sometime." Megan whipped around, glaring at him. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are, telling me how to run my cafe?" Daniel met her stare, his patience finally gone. "I think," he said, pulling off his cap and yanking off his fake glasses, "that I own this cafe. And I think you're done here." The color drained from Megan's face. The room went still as employees and customers alike realized what had just happened. Daniel straightened his posture, no longer just another worker but the CEO of Coastal Brews himself. "Everyone," Daniel announced, his voice clear and strong, "we need to have a staff meeting, right now." Megan stared in disbelief, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but the truth was out, and in a matter of minutes everything was about to change. The cafe remained eerily silent as Daniel stood near the counter, his true identity now fully revealed. Employees exchanged stunned glances, while customers watched in quiet anticipation. Megan, still frozen in place, her face drained of color, suddenly let out a forced laugh. "You're joking, right?" she scoffed, crossing her arms. "This is some kind of prank?" Daniel's expression remained firm and unwavering. "No, Megan. I've been here undercover for the past 2 days, watching how this cafe is run, and what I've seen is completely unacceptable." His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. Lily's eyes widened, realization dawning as she slowly put a hand over her mouth. Some of the younger employees shifted nervously, as if afraid of what would happen next, but Megan, true to form, doubled down. "So what?" she snapped, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "You think you can just walk in here, pretend to be one of us, and pass judgment? You don't know what it's like to run this place." Daniel took a measured step forward, his voice even but sharp. "Actually, Megan, I do. I built this company from the ground up with the idea that Coastal Brews should be a place where both customers and employees feel valued, and what I've seen here is the complete opposite." He gestured toward the staff. "Your employees are overworked and scared to speak up. Your customers are being mistreated, and you've contributed nothing but toxicity and laziness." Megan's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't understand how hard it is to deal with people like them," she spat, gesturing toward the elderly customer and the young barista. "They just complain and slow everything down." That was the final straw. Daniel straightened his shoulders, his voice cold and decisive. "You're fired, Megan. Effective immediately." A collective gasp rippled through the cafe. Megan's mouth fell open in disbelief. You? You can't do that. I own this cafe, Daniel said simply, and I refuse to let someone like you ruin it. Megan stood there fuming before grabbing her bag and storming toward the exit. The moment she slammed the door behind her, it felt as though a weight had been lifted off the room. Daniel turned back to the employees. Things are going to change, starting today, and for the first time in a long time, hope returned to Coastal Brews. The moment Megan stormed out of Coastal Brews, a visible shift swept through the cafe. The tension that had been lingering for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a cautious but growing sense of relief. Employees exchanged nervous glances, still processing what had just happened. Lily, standing behind the counter, looked both shocked and hopeful. Daniel knew the work wasn't done yet, but for the first time in a long time, he could see a future for this place. He turned to the staff, addressing them with the authority of a leader but the warmth of someone who understood their struggles. I know the past few months haven't been easy, he began. But that changes today. This cafe is meant to be a place where both employees and customers feel welcome, and I'm committed to making that happen. With that, he introduced Rachel, the new manager, someone he had personally selected from another successful location. Rachel had a reputation for fairness, teamwork, and treating her employees with respect, everything Megan had lacked. As she stepped forward, she gave the staff a reassuring smile. I'm not here to bark orders or make your jobs harder, she told them. I'm here to work with you. Together, we're going to rebuild this cafe into the place it was always meant to be. But the biggest announcement came next. Daniel turned to Lily, whose dedication and kindness had kept the cafe afloat despite the toxic leadership. Lily, he said, his voice filled with admiration, I've seen how much you care about this place. You've shown incredible patience, leadership, and commitment, and because of that, I want to offer you a promotion to assistant manager. Lily's eyes widened in disbelief. Me? Are you serious? Daniel smiled. I've never been more serious. A ripple of applause broke out from the other employees. Some even patted Lily on the back, congratulating her. For the first time, she looked proud and confident, standing a little taller as she accepted her new role. As Daniel watched the team begin to come together, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: pride in his business again. Coastal Brews wasn't just a cafe, it was a community, and with the right people in place, it was finally on its way to becoming everything he had always envisioned. This was the beginning of something better. As Daniel stepped out of Coastal Brews that evening, he paused for a moment, looking back through the cafe's large front window. The once tense and chaotic environment had already started to shift. Employees were smiling and working together, customers looked comfortable and valued, and the cafe finally felt like the place he had envisioned when he first built the company. He watched as Lily assisted a young man who looked nervous ordering for the first time, patiently walking him through the menu with her usual kindness. It reminded him of why he had started this business in the first place, not just to sell coffee, but to create a space where everyone felt welcome. Daniel sighed in relief, realizing just how close he had come to losing sight of his own mission. If he hadn't gone undercover, if he had just trusted the filtered reports from corporate, he might never have seen the truth. Leadership wasn't about sitting in an office, reading numbers on a spreadsheet. It was about being present, listening, and making real changes when necessary. As he turned to leave, he made a promise to himself. Never again would he allow himself to be disconnected from the heart of his business, because at the end of the day, success wasn't just about profit margins. It was about people. And as long as he led with compassion, accountability, and action, Coastal Brews would never lose its way again. The story of Daniel Carter's undercover experience at Coastal Brews highlights a powerful lesson in leadership, accountability, and the value of workplace culture. It serves as a reminder that true leadership is not about titles or authority, but about presence and action. Had Daniel relied solely on reports from his managers, he would have never uncovered the toxic work environment, the poor treatment of employees and customers, and the complete lack of leadership in his cafe. A key takeaway from the story is that businesses thrive or fail based on the people who run them. Megan's neglectful and condescending attitude created a culture of fear and apathy, while Lily's quiet dedication kept the cafe afloat. Without Daniel stepping in, the cafe would have continued its downward spiral. By actively engaging with his employees and seeing their struggles firsthand, Daniel was able to make meaningful changes that restored integrity, morale, and customer trust. Ultimately, the story teaches that leaders must stay connected to their teams, foster a culture of respect, and lead by example. A thriving workplace is built on support, fairness, and genuine care, and when those values are upheld, success naturally follows.